When you post a pay run in CenterPoint, not only are you posting general ledger entries for the net pay for each employee in the pay run, but you will also be creating liabilities for the taxes and deductions taken out of each employee's check. Additionally, you will create liabilities for any employer taxes and any employer benefits recorded in the pay run. For those, you will be posting both a liability and an expense. To pay those payroll liabilities through CenterPoint or to record a payment made on the liabilities through another means, you will go to Processes and Pay Invoices Due. From this screen, you will be allowed to either write out a check, include a payment in an ACH file, which is a means of paying the vendors electronically out of CenterPoint, or you can record transactions that were made via electronic funds transfers or in another system. If you're going to write out checks out of CenterPoint, you need to set up a preference by going to File and Preferences. Under the section called Vendor Invoices, there's a preference for printing checks. And either on the Application tab or Database tab, you'll want to select the printer that you want to print the checks on, the style of checks that you have ordered from your forms vendor, the stub type that you want to print the details on, and then if you don't have pre-printed checks, you could print the check number and company name and address on them. If you do have pre-printed checks, then you'll want to set those to no. The number of copies of the checks is always 1, so even if it's not set, it's 1, unless you change it to something else. I'm going to click Save to save that preference. On the Pay Invoices Due screen, you'll need to select the company, or if you're using our fund accounting product, the label for that field might say fund. So the company or fund that you're paying the payroll liabilities for. And if you want that to be a default, that when you come to this screen next time, you can right click and set it as a default. Then you'll need to select the bank account that you're going to make the payments from. And once again, once you select it, if you want it to be a default for that company or fund, you can right click and set it as the default for that company or fund. What you're going to see at the detail section of this is a list of vendors that have open invoices. They may include more than just payroll vendors if you happen to be integrated with one of our accounting software products. So to make it so that you're just looking at payroll vendors, you can select the filter for payroll liabilities. Okay, I only had payroll vendors, so it didn't change. CenterPoint also allows you to pay vendors via an electronic means called an ACH file. There's a separate video on setting up ACH files and setting up vendors to receive ACH payments. You'll want to view that video for details on the ACH payments. However, on this screen, when you are recording payments to vendors, you do need to separate out ACH payments from any other kinds of payment that you're making. So you'll want to take and say that you don't want to see the ACH vendors right now if you're recording a payment via a different means. Then what I'm left with is a list of vendors. Now these vendors and the amount due to those vendors. These vendors are the vendors that you selected when you set up your payroll liabilities. CenterPoint requires you to select the vendor that you want to post those liabilities to. Okay. And you'll see an amount due for them. However, that might not be the total amount due to that vendor. I'm going to open up these liabilities for this vendor. You'll notice that this vendor has an invoice date, which was the date of the payroll of 6/4, but the liability has a due date of 6/15. When you set up your payroll vendors, we're also going to have a place there where you can select payment terms for those payroll vendors, and that will calculate the due date. If you don't select any payment term, then the payroll date and the due date will be the same date. And you'll see that here on another vendor that I have where the payroll date and the due date are the same date. Because of those due dates, I might not be seeing everything that's due to this vendor. So you notice right now that All Care of Colorado is $103.84. And that's because I'm finding the invoices based off of the due date of 7/10. But if I change that due date to 7/15, you'll notice that it also changes the amount for All Care of Colorado to $259.60. And if I open up the invoices for that vendor by clicking on the plus sign next to the vendor, it includes invoices now that have a due date of 7/15, and that's because I changed my date up at the top. When displaying the invoices on this screen, you can display them based off of their due date, or down in the options box, you can choose to find invoices based off of their invoice date. The invoice date is basically the date of the payroll. So you have both of those options. I'm going to go back to due date, and I'm going to change my date back to 7/10. Next, you'll record the date that the payments should be posted as of, and if you're writing out checks, that's going to be the date that goes on the check. And then you're going to select what sequence of numbers you want to assign to these payments. Since I'm writing out checks, I want my check number. However, if I click on the button to the far right, you can see that I've set up sequences to record electronic funds transfers and to record payments being made via an ACH file. So my default, though, was my payroll checks, and that's the sequence of numbers that I'm using. You can set up additional sequences for your bank account by going to Setup and General and Numbering Sequences, and there should be a separate video on how to create those numbering sequences. Before I record a payment to these vendors, I want to talk about some of the features of this screen. I'm going to open up the vendor All Care of Colorado to display its invoices. Some vendors might require you to pay different invoices on different checks. And if you do need that feature, then as you open up the invoices, you'll notice that there is a separate checks column where I can select that those go onto different checks. So you can select up to 5 different checks for your invoices. Another adjustment or another kind of feature of this screen is the ability to make an adjustment to your payroll liabilities without causing you to have to void out a pay run. To do that, you can open up the invoice to another level, to a more detailed level. And if you see an amount that needs to change, you can click on the adjustment button, put in what the amount is that you should be paying, or what the amount that the invoice should be. So I could say $51.24, and the system will calculate the adjustment amount. And then you can select which expense account you want to post that against and click OK. And so it'll have the adjustment there. So when you pay this invoice, it'll post both the amount, the full amount due, and the adjustment to come up with the amount to pay. Okay, I'm going to remove that for right now, but I wanted to show you that option. Another feature that we have that also will help in the future and avoid having to void out pay runs is the ability to change a payroll vendor. So it sometimes happens where, you might be using one insurance company for your benefits, but you've changed insurance companies but forgot to update the vendor on the payroll liability. So when payroll posted, it might have the wrong vendor on it. If you need to change the vendor on a liability that's already been posted, we will allow you to do that without having to void the pay run. What you have to do is open up the invoice to the lowest level, and then you can right-click there and choose to change the vendor. Now, it's only going to change it for that one invoice detail, so you do need to change it for each one individually. You'll also want to update the vendor on the payroll liability account for future payrolls. If you're paying all of your vendors at the same time, you could click the Pay All. But chances are I'm not paying all of these vendors the same way, so I'm going to reset that. And for the vendors that I want to write a check out to, I'm going to select them individually by putting a check mark next to them in the Pay column. If you have a vendor that you're not paying the full amount to, you could put in the amount that you're paying in the pay amount box. Let's say I said I'm going to pay $82 and hit tab. And what the system will do is it'll distribute that $82 to the oldest invoice first. So you see that it applied all of the amount to this invoice, and then it applied the additional amount to the next invoice. So it does it in chronological order. Okay, I wanted to pay the whole one, so I'm going to uncheck it and then check it again so that I'm paying the whole amount. For some vendors, you might need to open up their list of invoices and select which ones you want to pay if you're not paying all of them. Once you've done that, you can collapse it again, and now we're ready to post our payment. Before I post the payment, though, if I want to print out a check, I'll want to click on the Print Check button and say that I want to print the check. It'll bring in all of the preferences that I set up in Preferences. I can change them, and then I can click OK. Now I'm ready to post. However, if I want that print check box to be marked by default next time I go to print checks, I could right-click and set this as a default. And then it becomes the default setting for the combination of this company, this bank account, and this sequence. Okay, now I'm ready to post those payments. So I'm going to let it post those checks and write the checks out. Now the screen is ready for me to either enter in a payment using a different means, or if I'm done making payments, I can click close.